The coffee maker gurgled to life at 4:47 a.m., same as always. Julia moved through our kitchen like clockwork, her scrubs crisp and white, hair pulled back in that practical bun she'd worn for 12 years of marriage. 3 times a week, this routine. 3 times a week, she'd kiss my forehead and whisper, "Back by morning, honey." I should have questioned it sooner. "Another rough night ahead?" I asked from the doorway, watching her fill her thermos. The fluorescent light made her look pale, tired, or maybe that was just the guilt I couldn't see yet. "Emergency department never sleeps," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Mrs. Patterson called in with the flu. They need coverage." Julia had always been a terrible liar. The tells were subtle, the way she touched her neck, how her voice pitched slightly higher, the fact that she'd mentioned Mrs. Patterson's flu 3 times this month. But I trusted her. 12 years of marriage builds that kind of faith, even when the foundation starts showing cracks. She grabbed her keys from the hook by the door, the same keys that would lead me to the truth in 2 weeks' time. "Love you, Tom." "Love you too." The garage door rumbled shut, and I was alone again with the morning news and my growing suspicions. Not about another man. Never crossed my mind. But something felt wrong, like when you're framing a house and the measurements don't add up. You can force the pieces together, but the structure stays weak. I'd been a contractor for 15 years, built half the subdivisions in our county. You learn to spot problems before they become disasters. The trick is knowing when to trust your instincts. Our bank statements lay scattered across the kitchen table from the night before. Julia's emergency fund withdrawals had increased over the past year. Small amounts, nothing dramatic, but consistent. When I'd asked about them, she'd mentioned gas, food, work clothes. Reasonable explanations that didn't quite explain the math. 200 here, 300 there. It added up to more than her night shifts could justify. I picked up my phone and scrolled to the hospital's main number. My finger hovered over the call button for a full minute before I set it down. Trust, I told myself. Marriage means trust. But trust doesn't pay the bills, and those withdrawals were starting to worry me. We had a mortgage, car payments, the usual middle-class anchor that keeps you working until you're too old to enjoy retirement. Julia's nursing salary helped, but we weren't rich. Every dollar mattered. The local news droned about traffic and weather while I showered and dressed for another day of managing construction crews and dealing with homeowners who change their minds about cabinet colors. Normal life, the kind that feels solid until you discover it's built on lies. Eddie Martinez called while I was backing out of the driveway. My crew chief had been with me for 8 years, reliable as sunrise and twice as loud. "Boss, we got a problem at the Riverside site. Inspector wants to see you before we pour the foundation." "What kind of problem?" "The kind that costs money. Better get here quick." I spent the morning dealing with permit issues and concrete delays, the usual headaches that come with building houses in a county where half the officials act like they're doing you a favor by letting you work. By lunch, I'd forgotten about Julia's strange morning routine and our mysterious bank withdrawals. That evening, she came home at 7:23 a.m., same as always. Her scrubs were still clean, not a wrinkle or stain to suggest she'd spent 8 hours in an emergency room. She smelled like vanilla perfume, not the antiseptic scent that usually clung to her after hospital shifts. "How was your night?" I asked, pouring coffee. "Quiet, thankfully. Only 2 admissions." She yawned, stretching like someone who'd been sitting in a comfortable chair rather than running between patient rooms. "I'm going to shower and sleep for a few hours." I nodded, kissed her cheek, and went to work. But the questions followed me all day, nagging like a splinter you can't quite reach. Small details that didn't fit the pattern. A wife who worked night shifts but never looked tired. Bank withdrawals that didn't match her explanations. The way she'd started keeping her phone face down during dinner. That night, I did something I'd never done in 12 years of marriage. I checked our cell phone bill online, scrolling through Julia's call history. Most numbers I recognized. Her sister, her mother, a few friends from work. But one number appeared regularly, always during her supposed shift hours, always lasting 20 or 30 minutes. I wrote it down on a scrap of paper and stared at it until the numbers burned into my memory. Tomorrow, I decided, I'd find out who my wife was really talking to during those long night shifts. Trust is like concrete. It takes time to cure properly, but once it sets, it can support tremendous weight. The problem comes when you discover cracks in the foundation. You can patch them, reinforce them, pretend they don't exist. But eventually, the whole structure comes down. I was about to learn just how deep those cracks ran. The GPS tracker cost me $49 at the electronics store on Maple Street. Nothing fancy, just a basic unit with magnetic backing that I'd originally bought for my work trucks after some tools went missing from job sites. I'd forgotten about it until I was cleaning out my garage and found it in a toolbox. "You sure about this, boss?" Eddie asked when I told him my plan. We were sitting in his pickup during lunch break, eating sandwiches and watching traffic crawl past the construction site. "Maybe she's just working extra hours and not telling you. Some people don't like talking about money problems." "Then why lie about it? Why not just say she's picking up overtime?" Eddie shrugged. "Women are complicated. My ex-wife used to hide shopping bags in the trunk for 3 days before bringing them in the house. Made no sense to me, but it made sense to her. This is different. Maybe. But once you go down this road, there's no going back. You find something you don't like, your marriage is over. You find nothing. You'll always wonder what else she might be hiding. Either way, you're screwed." He was right, of course. But the alternative was living with questions that grew larger every day, watching my wife disappear 3 nights a week into a life I knew nothing about. The not knowing was eating me alive. That evening, I waited until Julia left for her shift before slipping into the garage. Her car was already gone, but I knew her routine. She always stopped at the gas station on 5th Street to buy coffee and sometimes a magazine. That gave me maybe 10 minutes. I jogged 3 blocks to the station and spotted her Honda in the parking lot. She was inside, chatting with the clerk like she had all the time in the world. Not the behavior of someone rushing to cover an emergency room shift. The tracker attached to her rear bumper with a soft click, hidden behind the license plate where she'd never think to look. My hands shook slightly as I walked back to my truck, parked across the street. This felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. Julia emerged 5 minutes later with her coffee and a magazine. Better Homes and Gardens, not exactly emergency room reading material. She drove east toward the hospital, and for a moment I thought maybe I'd been wrong about everything. Maybe she really was just working nights and I was turning into a paranoid husband who spied on his wife. Then she drove right past the hospital exit. I followed at a distance, my heart hammering against my ribs. She continued east for another 6 miles, then turned north into Willowbrook Estates, one of the newer subdivisions I'd helped build 3 years ago. Nice houses, well-maintained lawns, the kind of neighborhood where people waved at strangers and kids rode bikes in the street. Julia pulled into the driveway of a colonial at the end of Elm Street. Even from 2 blocks away, I could see the house clearly. White shutters, red door, swing set in the backyard. A man came out to meet her, tall and lean with graying hair. He kissed her on the mouth, not a friendly peck, but the kind of kiss married people share. Then the front door burst open, and 2 children ran out. A boy around 8, a girl maybe 6. They threw their arms around Julia's waist, and I heard their voices carry across the quiet evening air. "Mommy! Mommy's home!" I sat in my truck for 20 minutes, taking pictures with my phone and trying to process what I was seeing. My wife, the woman I'd shared a bed with for 12 years, was living a completely different life 6 miles from our house. She had another family, another husband, children who called her mother. The rational part of my brain kept insisting there had to be an explanation. Maybe she was babysitting for a friend. Maybe the man was her brother. though Julia didn't have a brother. Maybe the children were confused, calling her mommy because she spent time with them. But the kiss told the real story. You don't kiss your babysitter like that. You don't kiss your sister-in-law like that. You kiss your wife like that when she comes home from work and you're happy to see her. I drove home in a daze, parked in my garage, and sat in the dark for an hour. Everything I thought I knew about my life had just collapsed. 12 years of marriage, 12 years of trust and shared dreams and planning for the future, and it was all built on lies. The house felt different when I finally went inside. Same furniture, same pictures on the walls, same smell of Julia's vanilla candles. But it wasn't home anymore. It was just a place where I slept between discovering the truth about my wife's double life. I poured 3 fingers of whiskey and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photos on my phone. 62 pictures in total, each one documenting a reality I'd never suspected. Julia hugging children who weren't ours. Julia kissing a man who wasn't me. Julia living a life where I didn't exist. The worst part wasn't the betrayal, though that cut deep enough. The worst part was the planning it must have taken. You don't accidentally acquire a second family. You don't stumble into a double life. This took years of careful deception, years of looking me in the eye and lying about where she spent her nights. How long had it been going on? Who was the man? Were those children hers biologically, or was she playing stepmother to someone else's kids? Did they know about me, or was I the secret she kept from her other life? Questions multiplied like cancer cells, each one spawning 3 more. I drank the whiskey and stared at the photos until the numbers on my phone blurred together. Somewhere across town, my wife was tucking other people's children into bed and kissing another man goodnight. Tomorrow, I decided, I'd start getting answers. Real answers. Not the comfortable lies I'd been accepting for who knows how long. But first, I needed to know exactly how deep this deception went. I pulled up our bank statements on my laptop and started tracing every withdrawal, every expense, every dollar that didn't quite make sense. If Julia was supporting 2 households, the money had to come from somewhere. And if I was going to confront her, I needed more than photographs and suspicions. I needed proof that would hold up in divorce court. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to every car that passed, wondering if one of them was bringing my wife home from her other life. She usually returned around 7 in the morning, tired but not exhausted, smelling like vanilla instead of hospital antiseptic. Now I knew why. At 5 a.m., I gave up pretending to sleep and went to the kitchen. Coffee, toast, and the laptop. Time to follow the money trail that would either confirm my worst fears or reveal something even worse. Our joint checking account told the first part of the story. Julia's direct deposits from the hospital were exactly what they should be for a part-time nurse working 3 shifts per week. But the withdrawals painted a different picture. Cash advances from ATMs across town, always on her work nights. Grocery store purchases that never resulted in food appearing in our refrigerator. Gas station charges that added up to twice what her Honda should consume. Then I found the real smoking gun. Automatic transfers to a savings account I'd never seen before. $50 here, $100 there, always timed with her paychecks. Over the past 2 years, she'd moved nearly $8,000 into an account that didn't appear on any statements I received. I called the bank as soon as they opened. I need information about a savings account linked to my wife's name, I told the customer service representative. Julia Henderson, Social Security number. I rattled off the details I'd memorized after 15 years of filing joint tax returns. I'm sorry, sir, but I can only provide information about accounts where you're listed as an authorized user. This account shows only Mrs. Henderson's name. We're married. We have joint accounts. I understand, but this particular account was set up as individual ownership. You'd need written authorization from your wife or a court order to access the details. I hung up and stared at the laptop screen. A secret bank account meant premeditation. Julia wasn't just having an affair, She was planning for something. Maybe divorce, maybe running away with her other family, maybe something I hadn't thought of yet. Eddie found me in my office at the construction site 3 hours later, still staring at bank records and trying to make sense of the timeline. "Boss, you look terrible. When's the last time you slept?" "Julia's been lying to me for years, Eddie. She's got another family, another house, secret bank accounts, the whole thing." I showed him the photos from the night before. Eddie whistled low and shook his head. "Man, that's rough. You sure those are her kids?" "They called her Mommy. And even if they're not biologically hers, she's been playing house with some other guy while I'm home alone, thinking she's saving lives at the hospital. What are you going to do?" That was the question I'd been avoiding all morning. Confronting Julia would end our marriage, but the marriage was already over. I just hadn't known it yet. The question was whether to give her a chance to explain or skip straight to divorce papers. "I need more information first. Names, addresses, how long this has been going on. If I'm going to divorce her, I want to make sure she doesn't take me for everything I've got." "You want help?" "I know a guy who does investigations, used to be a cop. Discreet, reasonable rates." I shook my head. "This is personal. I need to handle it myself." That afternoon, I drove back to Willowbrook Estates and parked down the street from the Colonial House. A mailbox at the end of the driveway read, "Pierce Family," in cheerful blue letters. Lawson Pierce, according to the property records I'd looked up online. Real estate agent, married, 2 children from a previous relationship. Except now he was apparently married to my wife too. I sat in my truck and watched the house for 2 hours. Lawson left at 3:30, probably to show properties or meet clients. The children came home on a school bus at 4:15, let themselves in with keys they pulled from backpacks. Normal suburban routine, the kind of life Julia and I had talked about having someday. Turns out she'd been having it all along, just not with me. At 6:45, Julia's Honda pulled into the driveway. Same routine as the night before. Lawson greeting her with a kiss, children running to hug her, the picture of domestic happiness. I took more photos, documenting times and license plates and anything else that might matter in court. But mostly I just sat there, watching my wife live a life I'd never been invited to join. My phone buzzed with a text message from Julia. "Working late tonight, don't wait up. Love you." The casual cruelty of it hit me like a punch to the stomach. She was standing in another man's driveway, hugging children who weren't ours, and texting me lies about working late. How many times had she done this? How many nights had I eaten dinner alone while she played happy family with people who actually mattered to her? I drove home and called a lawyer. "Divorce cases involving adultery can be complicated," the attorney explained over the phone. "Virginia is a no-fault state, but evidence of adultery can still affect property division and spousal support. You'll want to document everything. Financial records, photographs, witness statements if possible." "What about secret bank accounts?" "That's considered dissipation of marital assets. If she's been hiding money or using joint funds to support another relationship, the court will take that into account. How much money are we talking about?" "At least $8,000 that I can prove, probably more." "Keep gathering evidence. Don't confront her until you've secured copies of all financial records and consulted with an attorney in person. And whatever you do, don't do anything that could be construed as harassment or stalking. Take pictures from public property. Document what you can see, but don't trespass or make contact with the other parties involved." I hung up, feeling slightly more in control. This wasn't just about a cheating wife anymore. It was about protecting myself financially and legally. Julia had been planning her double life for years. Now it was time for me to start planning my exit strategy. But first, I wanted to know exactly how long she'd been lying to me, and I had an idea about where to find those answers. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to Memorial Hospital. If Julia had been lying about her night shifts, someone there would know the truth. The trick was getting them to tell me without making it obvious I was investigating my own wife. The emergency department buzzed with controlled chaos, nurses hurrying between rooms, doctors consulting charts, the constant background noise of monitors and conversations. I approached the information desk, where a middle-aged woman with kind eyes was answering phones. "Excuse me, I'm looking for my wife, Julia Henderson. She works night shifts in the emergency department." The woman's expression shifted slightly. "Julia Henderson? Are you sure she works nights? I've been here 6 years and I don't recall seeing her during night shifts." My stomach dropped. "Maybe I have the schedule wrong. She's been working 3 nights a week for the past few years. Hold on, let me check with the supervisor." She picked up the phone and had a brief, hushed conversation. When she hung up, her face was carefully neutral. "Mrs. Patterson would like to speak with you. She's the night shift supervisor." Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, with graying hair and the tired eyes of someone who'd seen everything a hospital emergency room could offer. She led me to a small office behind the nurses' station and closed the door. "You're Julia's husband?" "Yes, Tom Henderson. I'm going to be direct with you, Mr. Henderson, because I think you deserve to know the truth. Julia hasn't worked night shifts in over 3 years. She switched to day shifts in 2019 and has been working Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday mornings ever since." The room seemed to tilt sideways. "But she leaves the house 3 nights a week in scrubs. She tells me she's covering emergency shifts." "I'm sorry, but that's not true. Julia works 24 hours a week, all during day shifts. She's a good nurse, reliable, well-liked by her colleagues, but she definitely doesn't work nights." 3 years, I said, more to myself than to her. "She's been lying for 3 years. Mrs. Patterson's expression softened. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but Julia's personal life has been complicated lately. Some of the other nurses have mentioned seeing her around town with a man who isn't you. I don't like to gossip, but given what you're telling me about the night shifts, you think she's having an affair. I think your wife has been living a double life, and I'm sorry you're finding out this way." I thanked her and left the hospital in a daze. 3 years. For 3 years, Julia had been kissing me goodbye and driving off to play house with another family while I sat at home like an idiot, proud of my wife's dedication to her patients. The timeline made horrible sense now. 3 years ago, Julia had started talking about wanting children. We'd been trying for a while without success, and she'd grown increasingly distant and moody. I'd attributed it to the stress of fertility treatments and the disappointment of negative pregnancy tests. Turns out, she'd found another way to become a mother. I drove to the county courthouse and requested copies of all public records related to Lawson Pierce and the property on Elm Street. The clerk was helpful but slow, and it took 2 hours to get the documents I needed. But they told the story I'd been dreading to hear. Lawson Pierce had purchased the house 4 years ago, shortly after his divorce from his first wife. The mortgage application listed him as single, no dependents. But 3 years ago, he'd refinanced the property with a co-signer, Julia Henderson. My wife had signed legal documents committing herself financially to another man's house. She'd used our joint credit to help him secure better loan terms, and she'd done it all without telling me. The betrayal was so complete, so carefully planned, that I had to sit in my truck in the courthouse parking lot for 20 minutes before I could drive. This wasn't a simple affair or even a complicated emotional entanglement. Julia had legally and financially bound herself to another man while maintaining the pretense of marriage to me. I called Eddie from the parking lot. "I need you to cover the Riverside project for the rest of the week. I've got some personal business to handle." "You going to confront her?" "Not yet. First, I'm going to make sure I have enough evidence to protect myself in the divorce. She's been planning this for years, Eddie. I need to be just as careful." "You want me to come with you? Moral support?" "Thanks, but I need to handle this alone. Just keep the crews working, and don't let the inspector give you any trouble about the foundation pour." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by bank statements, property records, and photographs. The evidence was overwhelming, but I wanted to understand the full scope of Julia's deception before I made my next move. The secret bank account was just the beginning. Credit card statements showed regular purchases at stores I'd never heard of. Children's clothing, toys, groceries that never made it to our house. She'd been supporting 2 households on one salary, supplemented by money she'd been systematically transferring from our joint accounts. But the most damning evidence was the mortgage document with her signature. Julia had committed us financially to her boyfriend's house without my knowledge or consent. In Virginia, that was grounds for both divorce and a lawsuit. I poured myself a whiskey and stared at the photographs from Willowbrook Estates. Tomorrow, I decided, I'd pay a visit to Lawson Pierce. It was time to find out if he knew about me or if Julia had been lying to both of us. Either way, her carefully constructed double life was about to come crashing down. Lawson Pierce worked out of a real estate office in a strip mall on the east side of town. I'd looked up his business online and found the usual promotional photos. Middle-aged man in an expensive suit, arms crossed, confident smile. The kind of guy who probably drove a luxury sedan and belonged to the country club. I parked across the street at 10 a.m. and waited. Through the office window, I could see him at a desk, talking on the phone and gesturing with his free hand. He looked younger than in his professional photos, maybe 45, with the kind of casual confidence that comes from success and good genetics. At 10:30, he emerged from the office and walked to a silver BMW parked in front. I followed him at a distance, curious about his daily routine and looking for an opportunity to approach him without making a scene. He drove to a coffee shop downtown, the kind of place where business people met clients and college students worked on laptops. I gave him 5 minutes to get settled, then walked inside. Lawson sat at a corner table, scrolling through his phone while sipping what looked like an expensive latte. I bought black coffee and approached his table. "Excuse me, are you Lawson Pierce?" He looked up, sizing me up with the practiced eye of someone who dealt with strangers professionally. "Yes. Can I help you?" "I'm Tom Henderson. I think we need to talk about Julia." His face went white. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he set down his phone and gestured to the empty chair across from him. "How long have you known?" he asked. "I found out 3 days ago. You?" "Known about what?" I pulled out my phone and showed him one of the photographs from Elm Street. "Known that my wife has been playing house with you and your children while telling me she's working night shifts at the hospital." Lawson stared at the photo for a long moment, then looked up at me with something that might have been relief. "She told me she was divorced. She said the papers were final 2 years ago. We're still married, 12 years next month, assuming we make it that long." "Jesus." He ran his hands through his hair. "She's been living with us for 3 years. The kids call her Mom. I was going to propose next month." We sat in silence, 2 men who'd been played by the same woman in different ways. I felt a strange kinship with him, even though he'd been sleeping with my wife. We were both victims of Julia's elaborate deception. "How did you meet her?" I asked. "At the hospital. My son broke his arm skateboarding, and Julia was his nurse. She was so good with him, so caring. We started talking, and she mentioned being recently divorced and lonely." He shook his head. "She seemed perfect. Great with kids, stable job, looking for a serious relationship." "What about the house? She co-signed your mortgage." "She insisted on it. Said she wanted to contribute, to be a real partner. I thought it was romantic." He laughed bitterly. "Turns out it was just another lie." I showed him the bank records I'd printed out. "She's been taking money from our joint account to help support your household. $8,000 over the past 2 years, maybe more." Lawson studied the documents, his expression growing darker. "She's been telling me she had savings from her divorce settlement. That's how she's been contributing to groceries and utilities and the kids' expenses." "There was no divorce settlement. She's been stealing from me to play house with you." We talked for another hour, comparing stories and filling in the gaps in Julia's elaborate fiction. She'd told him I was an abusive ex-husband who'd made her life miserable. She'd told me she was working extra shifts to help us save money for the future. She'd told his children that their real mother didn't love them, but Julia would always be there for them. Every relationship in her life was built on lies tailored to give her what she wanted from each person. "What are you going to do?" Lawson asked finally. "Divorce her. Take her for everything I can get, which probably isn't much since she's been spending our money on your family for 3 years. I have to end it too. I can't trust her, and I can't let my kids get more attached to someone who's been lying to them about everything." He paused. "But they love her. This is going to destroy them." She should have thought about that before she decided to live a double life. We exchanged contact information, agreeing to share any additional evidence we uncovered. Lawson promised to document Julia's financial contributions to his household, which would help prove she'd been using marital assets to support her affair. As I walked back to my truck, I felt something I hadn't experienced in days: clarity. Julia's web of lies was unraveling, and both of her victims were now working together to expose the truth. She'd been so careful, so methodical in her deception, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated the men she was manipulating. That evening, I sat in my garage and planned my next move. Confronting Julia directly would give her a chance to spin new lies or destroy evidence. But I had a better idea, one that would force her to face both of her victims at the same time. Tomorrow was Thursday, one of her night shifts. Instead of following her to Elm Street, I'd be waiting there when she arrived, and Lawson would be waiting too. It was time for Julia's two worlds to collide. Thursday evening, I parked 3 houses down from the Pierce residence and called Lawson. We'd spent the morning coordinating our plan, and he'd agreed to confront Julia with me present. His children were spending the night with their grandmother, giving us privacy for what was likely to be an ugly scene. "She just texted that she's running late," Lawson said over the phone. "Should be here in 20 minutes. I'll stay out of sight until she's inside. Then I'll come to the front door. Are you sure about this? Once we do this, there's no going back." There was no going back the moment she decided to lie to both of us for 3 years. I hung up and waited, watching the house where my wife played mother to children who weren't hers. The irony wasn't lost on me. Julia and I had tried for years to have children, spending thousands on fertility treatments and specialists. All the while, she'd been satisfying her maternal instincts with someone else's family. At 7:15, her Honda pulled into the driveway. Through my telephoto lens, I watched the same routine I'd observed twice before. Lawson greeting her with a kiss, Julia hugging him like she'd missed him all day. Except tonight, there were no children running to greet her. I gave them 10 minutes to get settled, then walked to the front door and rang the bell. Lawson answered, his face grim but determined. "Julia, there's someone here to see you." I heard her voice from the living room. "Who is it? I'm not expecting anyone." "It's your husband." The silence that followed lasted maybe 5 seconds, but it felt like an hour. Then I heard footsteps, and Julia appeared in the doorway behind Lawson. She looked exactly like someone who'd just seen a ghost. "Tom." Her voice was barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" I could ask you the same question. I stepped into the house, uninvited, but not unwelcome. Lawson moved aside to let me pass. "Nice place. I especially like the mortgage documents with your signature on them." Julia's face cycled through several expressions: shock, fear, anger, and finally a desperate calculation. I could almost see her trying to figure out which lie might still work. "I can explain," she said. "I'm sure you can. You've been explaining a lot of things lately. Night shifts at the hospital, for instance. Except Mrs. Patterson tells me you haven't worked nights in 3 years. Julia looked between Lawson and me, realizing that her two worlds had not only collided, but were now working together against her. "How long have you known? About your double life? Since Monday? About the secret bank account and the mortgage fraud? Since yesterday? About you telling Lawson that we were divorced? Since this morning?" Lawson stepped forward. You told me he was abusive. You said he'd made your life hell and you were afraid of him. You told me you were working extra shifts to help us save money for the future, I added. Turns out you were stealing from our joint account to play house with your boyfriend. Julia sat down heavily on the couch, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Then I remembered 3 years of lies, 3 years of kissing me goodbye while planning to spend the evening with another family. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she said finally. How was it supposed to happen? I asked. Were you planning to divorce me eventually or just keep living 2 lives indefinitely? I was confused. After we kept trying to have children and it wasn't working, I felt like I was failing at the one thing I'd always wanted to do. Then I met Lawson and his kids, and they needed someone to take care of them. So you decided to take care of them with my money. It wasn't like that. Lawson sat down across from her, his expression hard. What was it like, Julia? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been lying to everyone who trusted you. She started crying then, the kind of tears that might have worked on me a week ago. But I'd used up my sympathy for Julia Henderson. She'd made her choices deliberately and systematically, and now she had to live with the consequences. I want you out of my house, I said. Tonight. Pack whatever you need and find somewhere else to stay. Tom, please, we can work this out. Marriage counseling, therapy, whatever you want. What I want is a divorce. What I want is my money back. What I want is to never see you again. Lawson stood up. I want the same thing. I want you out of my house and away from my children. They've been through enough without having to deal with someone who's been lying to them about everything. Julia looked between us, perhaps finally understanding that her carefully managed double life was over. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore, I said. You've had 3 years to plan for this moment. You must have some idea. I left her sitting on Lawson's couch and walked back to my truck. Tomorrow, I'd call the lawyer and start divorce proceedings. Tonight, I just wanted to go home to a house that would finally be mine alone. But first, I had one more stop to make. The next morning, I called my lawyer and scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. Then I drove to Julia's sister's house, where I suspected she'd spent the night. I was right. Her Honda was parked in the driveway behind a familiar blue sedan. Sarah answered the door with the wary expression of someone who'd already heard one version of recent events. She's not here, Sarah said. Her car says otherwise. I'm not here to cause trouble, Sarah. I just want to talk. She told me what happened. She said you've been spying on her and harassing her boyfriend. Did she tell you about the secret bank account? Or the mortgage fraud? Or the fact that she's been lying to all of us for 3 years? Sarah's expression shifted slightly. She said you were having marriage problems. We were. I just didn't know it. I pulled out copies of the bank records and mortgage documents. She's been stealing money from our joint account to support another man's household. She co-signed his mortgage without telling me, using our joint credit. In Virginia, that's grounds for both divorce and criminal charges. Sarah studied the documents, her face growing pale. I don't understand. She said Lawson was just a friend. Friends don't co-sign mortgages. Friends don't live together for 3 years. Friends don't lie to their spouses about working night shifts so they can play house with someone else's children. The front door opened wider, and Julia appeared behind her sister. She looked terrible. Red eyes, rumpled clothes, the appearance of someone who'd spent the night crying and making phone calls to damage control. What do you want, Tom? I want you to sign a separation agreement. I want you to agree to an uncontested divorce. And I want you to make arrangements to pay back the money you stole from our joint account. I didn't steal anything. That money was as much mine as yours. Not when you used it to support another relationship without my knowledge. My lawyer calls it dissipation of marital assets. The court will call it theft. Julia stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her. What if I don't agree to your terms? Then I'll file contested divorce proceedings and ask the court to award me everything. The house, the savings, your pension, everything we've built together over 12 years. I'll also file a complaint with the district attorney about the mortgage fraud. You wouldn't do that. Try me. You've lied to me for 3 years, Julia. You've stolen my money, damaged my credit, and made me look like a fool. I've got nothing left to lose, and every reason to make sure you pay for what you've done. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the documents in my hand. Finally, she looked up at me with something that might have been regret. I never meant for it to go this far. But it did. And now you have to decide whether you want to end this quietly or make it as ugly as possible for everyone involved. Sarah opened the door and rejoined us on the porch. Julia, maybe you should listen to him. If what he's saying is true about the money and the mortgage. It's all true, I said. I've got bank records, property documents, photographs, witness statements from the hospital. Your sister has been living a double life, and now both lives are over. Julia sat down on the porch steps, looking older than her 36 years. What happens to Lawson's children? They think I'm their mother. That's between you and Lawson, but from what he told me yesterday, he wants you out of their lives completely. They'll be devastated. They'll recover. Children are resilient, but they'll recover faster if they don't have to deal with someone who's been lying to them about everything. I handed her the separation agreement my lawyer had prepared. You have 48 hours to sign this and return it to my attorney's office. After that, I file contested proceedings and ask the court for everything. And if I sign it, you get to keep your car, your personal belongings, and half of our savings account, minus the $8,000 you've already stolen. I keep the house, my business, and my pension. We both walk away and never have to see each other again. Julia took the documents without reading them. I need time to think. You've had 3 years to think. Now you have 48 hours to decide. I left her sitting on her sister's porch and drove to my lawyer's office. The meeting took 2 hours, during which we reviewed all the evidence I'd gathered and discussed strategy for the divorce proceedings. This is one of the cleaner adultery cases I've seen, the attorney said. Your wife was systematic in her deception, but she was also sloppy about covering her tracks. The financial records alone are enough to prove dissipation of marital assets. What are the chances she'll sign the separation agreement? High. If she contests it, she'll lose everything and possibly face criminal charges. She's better off taking the deal you're offering. That evening I sat in my kitchen, in my house, and tried to figure out what came next. 12 years of marriage don't disappear overnight, even when they're built on lies. I'd have to rebuild my life from scratch, figure out who I was without Julia and her elaborate deceptions. But for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The questions that had been nagging at me for months finally had answers. The mystery withdrawals, the strange schedule, the vanilla perfume instead of hospital antiseptic. It all made sense now. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. This is Lawson. Julia came by to get her things. She's moving back to Richmond to stay with her mother. Thought you should know. I deleted the message and poured myself a whiskey. Tomorrow, I'd start the process of untangling 12 years of shared finances and legal obligations. But tonight, I was just going to sit in my house and enjoy the silence. For the first time in 3 years, I knew exactly where my wife was spending the night. And for the first time in 12 years, I didn't care. The separation agreement arrived at my lawyer's office on Monday morning, signed and notarized. Julia had taken the deal, which meant I could proceed with an uncontested divorce and avoid the expense and publicity of a court battle. She'd also included a note agreeing to pay back the stolen money in monthly installments over 2 years. Smart choice on her part, my attorney said during our phone call. She saves face and avoids potential criminal charges. You get your property and most of your money back. Everyone wins, sort of. When will the divorce be final? 6 months, assuming no complications. Virginia has a mandatory waiting period for contested divorces, but since she's agreed to your terms, it's just a matter of paperwork now. I hung up and looked around my office at the construction site. Life was slowly returning to normal, managing crews, dealing with inspectors, solving the daily problems that came with building houses. But everything felt different now, like I was seeing my world through new eyes. Eddie knocked on the trailer door and stuck his head inside. "Boss, we need your approval on the bathroom tile selection for the model home. Whatever the homeowner wants, it's their house." "You feeling okay? Usually you have opinions about everything." I laughed, realizing he was right. For years, I'd micromanaged every detail of every project, partly because I cared about quality, and partly because I needed to feel in control of something. Now that I'd taken control of the most important thing, my own life, the small stuff didn't seem as crucial. "I'm feeling better than I have in years, actually." "Good to hear. You've been different lately. More relaxed, I guess." That evening, I met Lawson for dinner at a restaurant downtown. It had been his idea, a chance to compare notes and discuss how to handle any remaining complications from Julia's double life. "She came by yesterday to get the last of her things," he said over beer and burgers. "The kids were at school, which was probably for the best. I don't think they understand why she's not coming back." "How are they handling it?" "Better than I expected. Kids are resilient, like you said. My ex-wife has been spending more time with them, which helps. Turns out Julia had been discouraging contact between them and their real mother." "That sounds like her. She always had to be the center of attention." "The weird part is, I actually feel relieved. Living with someone who lies about everything is exhausting, even when you don't know they're lying. There was always this underlying tension, like I was walking on eggshells without knowing why." I knew exactly what he meant. For months, maybe years, I'd felt like something was wrong in my marriage but couldn't put my finger on what. Now I understood it was the constant low-level stress of living with someone whose entire personality was a performance. "Any word on where she's living now?" "Richmond, with her mother. She's looking for nursing jobs down there, trying to start over." Lawson paused. "Part of me feels bad for her. She threw away 2 good relationships for what? The thrill of living a double life?" "Don't feel too bad. She made her choices deliberately and systematically. This isn't some momentary lapse in judgment. It's 3 years of calculated deception." We talked for another hour about practical matters, dividing shared expenses, handling any remaining legal issues, making sure our stories stayed consistent if anyone asked questions. But mostly, we just enjoyed the strange camaraderie of 2 men who'd survived the same elaborate con. "You know what the craziest part is?" Lawson said as we were leaving. "She was actually good at both lives. Good wife to you, good stepmother to my kids, good nurse at the hospital. If she'd put that much energy into one relationship instead of 2, she might have been happy. Some people are never happy with what they have. They always think there's something better just out of reach. Well, now she gets to find out what it's like to have nothing." I drove home through familiar streets that somehow looked different now. The same houses, the same traffic lights, the same route I'd driven for 12 years. But I wasn't the same person who'd driven it last week. My house felt different too. Bigger, quieter, more like a home and less like a stage set where Julia had performed the role of loving wife. I'd started making small changes, new coffee maker, different brand of beer in the refrigerator, music playing in rooms that had been silent for years. The hardest part wasn't anger or sadness. It was the realization of how much of my life I'd been living for someone else. Julia's schedule had dictated our social calendar. Her preferences had determined our vacation destinations. Her career had influenced our financial decisions. Now I had to figure out what I actually wanted, separate from what I'd thought we wanted together. I poured a whiskey and sat on the back porch, looking out at the yard I'd landscaped to Julia's specifications. Tomorrow, I decided, I'd call a landscaping company and have them tear out the flower beds she'd insisted on. I'd always preferred a simpler yard, more grass, and fewer high-maintenance plants. It was a small change, but it felt like the beginning of something larger. For the first time in years, I was making decisions based on what I wanted, not what someone else expected me to want. The divorce would be final in 6 months,